A very good afternoon. It's an honor to be here and to be delivering the closing lecture of this fabulous conference. I wanted to take this opportunity to ask a question that is rarely asked at security conferences. And that question is, when can we stop demanding more security? When is enough enough? I'm a security researcher myself and have been for many years. And I'm leading a small team in Berlin in Germany. Through that team and from that team, though, we have been helping large companies put into reality what we as researchers think is the right thing to do. And I want to today share a few observations that I made as a security practitioner, helping large companies, trying to do the right thing. And I want to draw in particular from one company that I've been involved with for a couple of years, a company called Jio, that's Hindi for life. So this is a company in India with the grand ambition of connecting 300 million people to the internet who have never once touched the internet, who have financial barriers to the internet, but also language barriers. Some of them are even illiterate, so user interface barriers. This company has been ramping up at a rapid speed for a couple of years. And a large investment is behind this, so this could be considered the largest startup company in the world. And they put me in charge of their security, basically asking me to decide when things are ready to enter the market. Now, this puts me as a security researcher in a great dilemma, because I see the market, I see how terrible the current choices in that market are, and I know for every month that I'm delaying our own products, people are going to face only insecure choices, and they'll pick one of these insecure choices, right? So you can see the dilemma for somebody who wants to do the right thing. Either you launch with something modestly secure that is still better than the market, or you see your potential customers go somewhere else where they're even less secure, right? From this understanding that there is a trade-off between security and at least speed of innovation, I want to share some thoughts today. And perhaps I want to shake a little bit the image of a lot of security professionals that we are there to protect the rest of the world. If it weren't for us, everybody would be hacked all the time. We are somewhat of a police force keeping them secure. Now, we as security professionals, we already look with some disdain on some other security professionals. For instance, these people at airports, we understand that they are mostly just wasting everybody's time. But I think a lot of people look at this community with the same disdain and think that we are the Department of No wasting their time. And I want to resolve this conflict in the next 50 minutes or so. And I want to do this in two areas. One is product security. That is where a company builds a product that then other people use securely and insecurely, right? And information security, which is where the company tries to keep their own information secure. Both of these are built on the same knowledge foundation, of course, right? And we as a community don't usually distinguish them. But as a practitioner, they do feel very different. Take, for instance, patch management. So in InfoSec, patch management is rather straightforward. You log into all your test servers, you deploy all the patches that Red Hat or Microsoft give you, and if everything still works, you deploy those same patches in production. But imagine on the product security side, you have to make sure that the patch that you're working on works in any possible scenario that your customers are using your technology. So you go through thousands or millions of test cases, and this can sink quite some time and budget. So, of course, there's examples where it's reversed, where InfoSec is much more difficult than product security. But for these differences, I want to keep them aside and start perhaps with product security. And I want to make a three-part argument. I want to argue that security researchers, myself included, are much too focused on headline-grabbing research that is most published and most sensationalized. I don't want to argue that companies strongly react to this sensational news. And finally, I want to argue that leaves this entire community focused on vulnerabilities instead of risks, where really we should be working on lowering risks, right? I will say that a lot of security researchers are trying to escape from this spiral, unsuccessfully though, because of course those are not being heard. Only the ones who are feeding the media hype get the most attention. And one technology that got a lot of attention recently for being very insecure, if you can trust the media, of course, is the iPhone. The iPhone went through 2 major hacks, at least again, if you trust the media. The one hack, of course, being this terrible Pegasus malware that was sent to some Arabian opposition person. And the other hack being the FBI extracting information from a locked terrorist phone with a hardware hack. And that hardware hack, so it's reported, is now available to really anybody for as little as $100, right? So just from reading in the news, you would think that the iPhone is very insecure. But if you do look at the facts, the malware that was created so much media hype was sent to just one person, right, that we know of, and that person didn't even click on it. All the antivirus programs that were created afterwards, all the community projects that were supposed to find either the malware on the devices or network traces that should suggest that the malware was installed, they came up with exactly nothing, right? This huge hype included 0 actual infections. And similarly was the recent news on now everybody can hack iPhones for $100. This is not targeting every iPhone. If you look at a market split from when this news broke, about 3/4 of the iPhones were not affected by this. All the iPhones that include a secure enclave processor. So only the oldest quarter of the market, people are using iPhones second or third hand, typically not in the developed world, wherever the ecosystem passes on phones to. That's where you may be infected or maybe cracked by somebody who has physical access to your phone and is willing to break the phone just to get out your secrets, right? So the media hype completely took this out of proportion, still leaving everybody with the feeling that the iPhone somehow is less secure than it was before. And companies do react to that. And the only thing that they react to stronger than the iOS insecurity hype, of course, is Android, right? Android must be the worst security system ever built, if you can believe the media, which reports basically on a weekly basis that 1 billion devices are insecure to stage fright and stage fright 2 and this Qualcomm bug and that other kernel vulnerability. So you'd imagine that almost all the Android phones are hacked, right? Turns out that less than 2% of those 1 billion devices are actually hacked. And the biggest chunk of that, about 10 million devices, so that's 1% of the global Android footprint, is hacked by just one malware that injects itself to pirated software. So the user has to actively disable security functions, download some pirated software, actively install it, and then they're infected. Now, we blame Android for that. On the Windows side of things, we would never blame Windows for somebody installing actively a virus after disabling all the security features, right? So the reporting, again, on Android is a little bit skewed. And if you do look at the market breakdown, about 90% of those phones who do get infected are very outdated versions. These are not even supported for security patches anymore. While the actual population of Android devices, about half of them are fairly recent versions who are still in security maintenance, right? So again, a disproportionately insecure fraction of the Android market gets all the hacking. And everybody else, especially in the developed world, where people cycle through phones every 2 years or so, nothing to worry about, right? And nothing to worry about, especially if you contrast this to the other operating system that a lot of you do trust, and that is Windows. Some It's hard to get good estimates here, but the estimates that you can get say that about 20 to 40% of Windows computers are infected, at least with some spyware or adware, something that is not in the interest of the user. And again, a lot of this is people just stupidly clicking on stuff and installing programs from the internet. But the same is true for those Android infections and iOS infections. They're really none to speak of, right? So it takes a somewhat naive user to get infected, a somewhat outdated operating system, and typically it happens on Windows, right? Still though, companies are driven by reporting predominantly into securing their mobile systems first. Almost all the requests we get for small studies are somewhere along the lines, can we use Android in our environment, or can we store data on the iOS devices we're already using? And the answer, of course, from my perspective is yes, absolutely store the data on your Apple device, but please delete that same data from your Windows computers. And nobody wants to go that far, right? And this is despite almost every incident in companies being driven by Windows instances, right? In all the forensics cases that I've done, there was maybe one Android device. There was never an Apple device involved, but hundreds of Windows computers or humans, right? Social engineering, that's still easier than breaking even Android, right? So that seems to be a great discrepancy between what's actually happening in terms of hacking and what people want to protect from, leaving me with the impression that we're fighting vulnerabilities and not risks, right? The risk in this case would be Windows, but nobody does anything fancy around Windows. Everybody's trying to do something fancy around the best operating system that was ever in widespread use, and that currently is iOS. And I'm as much to blame for this as anybody. For instance, some research we put out a few years ago, we called this Bad USB. Pretty neat idea where we modified the firmware of a little USB storage device to then infect all the computers it's connected to. I like the research a lot, but if you compare that to just a straight up targeted malware, it's much harder to deploy and much less effective in reaching scale in infection. So unless you run a nuclear power plant or something, this is probably not high on your to-do list. Still, when we came out with this research, literally hundreds of companies emailed us and asked, what can we do about this? How can we protect from bad USB? And so I'm to blame for wasting their time. They should rather use their time focusing on protecting themselves from social engineering and standard Windows malware, which every day can get them hacked, where bad USB, that still today is a theoretical possibility. Maybe the NSA put it into action. We don't know. We've never seen a real-world example, right? I'll give you one last point in case here. Car security. Probably aside from the iPhone, the other most hacked technology of the last year. And sure enough, Andy Greenberg did great reporting showing how hackers drove him off the road, suggesting that much worse could have happened if he had driven right into traffic. He would probably have died, right? So we're at the point now where hackers can kill people, suggests the media, right? Now let's contrast this with another property of cars, and that is safety. Cars have become much more safe, not secure, but safe over the years, partly thanks to new technology. Not all of this is due to technology. A lot of this will be better behavior, maybe less drunk driving. But some technologies have made an impact here. So let's just assume that the reporting on car security now gets car companies to reconsider the deployment schedules of their new fancy autonomous cars or whatever safety technology they want to deploy. Let's assume that they'll put everything through testing. They'll do design reviews, they'll do source code reviews, they'll do pen tests on the end-to-end system. That takes time, right? Let's say this takes 3 months of time, and all the safety technology that we're anticipating for the future to continue this downward trend, all this safety technology is being delayed. Then we are killing 200,000 people in the next 10 years because we're afraid of hackers. 200,000 people who die unnecessarily because Andy Greenberg said, I could have possibly died had these people been ill-intended. Right? Contrast that one guy who may have but didn't die to the 200,000 who will surely die if the safety technology isn't introduced as fast as it possibly could. And I'm sometimes embarrassed to be advocating more security and more security and more security myself, now reflecting on the externalities that I'm inflicting on ecosystems, where security is surely not the only thing that's important and surely not the only thing that can get people killed. Right? Switching gears here slightly to information security, and I promise no more dead people in this presentation. Companies internally have a similar struggle between security and then what I consider the most important thing inside a company, innovation. Right? Innovation is the future of any company. Companies who stop innovating disappear within a few years. They just get eaten up by competition. And good so, right? That keeps us progressing, right? But so how do companies approach security? Oftentimes, and these are bad examples for now, but I'll start with those. Oftentimes, companies approach security with a regime of restrictions. And say, here's our border firewall, and we'll allow port 80 and 443, so you can do web browsing, but not to Facebook, and Dropbox also is blocked, and everything else you're not allowed to do. And interesting case again, in India, when I started there was a team supposed to copy Dropbox as a solution, make it more Indian, 22 languages and all. But that team was not allowed to look at the real Dropbox that was blocked at the firewall. So they created a clearly inferior product for fear of somebody maybe in that company leaking some data through Dropbox, right? So clearly this cannot be a way of driving innovation. And sure enough, people find ways around that, right? Skype was definitely ahead of its time. Pretty ingeniously just popping up web servers everywhere, fake web servers, offering HTTPS and then tunneling Skype traffic through that. But a lot others followed suit. So today, basically everything goes through HTTPS and nobody knows what's inside those channels anymore. And why is that? Because HTTPS is allowed at the firewall, right? Now, you may think that that's just the normal way of doing business these days. If you are working in a corporation, you always find ways around security restrictions that hinder you doing business. And I think that's a good thing, actually. Otherwise, again, the most important thing, innovation, would stop. But sometimes this can lead to disaster. Remember the Target case where a vendor was asked to remote administer the air conditioning in Target stores, and the security team said, no, absolutely not, no remote access into our stores, we don't allow that, right? And so the company found a way anyway, because at the end of the day, air conditioning in the southern US for a supermarket, that's more important than security, right? That actually keeps the business rolling. So they made business continue by violating the security rule, but they did it so pathetically that they got hacked, standard passwords, RDP, you know the whole story. Now, who's to blame here? Is it the vendor who's at fault for making the business, for meeting the business objective? I don't think so. I think this is clearly the security team's fault for saying people cannot remotely connect into our stores. They completely ignored the need of running a supermarket, and as a result, made it less secure, ironically, than more secure. Right? But I think the vendor did exactly the right thing here. They just didn't do it very well. So people do circumvent security controls, and I applaud many of them for it if those security controls are unreasonable. But a lot of energy is spent on this. Not every security control is as easy to circumvent as this one, right? In fact, entire departments think about how can we circumvent security controls. And one technology very relevant in this context are enterprise buses, so what used to be called the service-oriented architecture. The idea behind that is make all services that a company offers accessible over web services, but make those web services be available in the entire company, no matter what network segment you're in. So there's a listener in every little network segment, and these are all connected to each other, so all services are universally useful. What is that? This is a big FU to whoever runs the firewalls. It's saying we completely ignore whatever rules you put in, that this network segment is not allowed to access this and all. It just says everybody can now again access everything. And what's the security team's response to that? That comes way late, so this has been a trend for some 10 years or so, to put a firewall on layer 7 inside the enterprise bus, right? So-called policy enforcement point, right? What's the CIO gonna do again? Well, they'll find some technology to get around that policy enforcement point. So it's an arms race that wastes a lot of time without actually providing any additional security. We're always left after 2 steps where we started from, right? And why do we do all of this? Why do the security people inside companies so viciously fight for more restrictions and more restrictions? Well, I can tell you one reason that is not the right reason, at least as far as the numbers tell us, and that is damage. So the prevented damage, the prevented hacking damage cannot possibly be the reason why we put so much emphasis on security. These numbers are in euros. Sorry, I don't mention this anywhere on the slide, so these are all euros. And we asked a bunch of very large German companies, what are the worst hacking incidents that you or anybody in your industry ever experienced, right? And what is the likelihood that this will happen to you, right? And between all the different types of incidents you see here, a company loses about 2 million euros a year to hacking, right? Over many years averaged. 2 million euros is about 200 million yen, right? For a very large company, that's not a lot of money, especially considering that these people, every single one of them, have more than 100 million euro security budget, right? So they're preventing a little bit of volatility on a 2 million damage, and they're spending 100 million on that, right? And worse yet, they have the potential to destroy billions in value. So that Dropbox case, right? This Indian company that wanted to come out with a Dropbox alternative, conquered the Indian market. I don't know what's the value of Dropbox, but they had a shot at creating something similar in a very large market. And 200 other applications. As I said, this is the largest startup in the world, I think. So there's 200 cases in which I, as a security guy, can destroy a business case. I can say, I don't allow that technology, and that seems a little bit too risky, and you get another security assessment, and you first fix all the bugs before I allow you to launch, right? I can destroy billion-dollar business case after billion-dollar business case as the possible downside. And again, the upside, a few million euros, right? Why does security exist in the form it does? I'll tell you why. Well, here's why it doesn't exist. People are always under the impression that security is there to prevent further damage, hacking damage, right? But again, the numbers that we already know, a few million losses, 100 million defense budget, that cannot possibly drive this development, right? So I'll tell you why I think security budgets are so large and reasonably large as they are. I think there's a great interaction between the level of security and the potential to innovate. And there's 2 possible ways in which security can influence the innovation potential. If a company goes completely unprotected and completely naive into the internet, into new technologies, into whatever, cloud, mobile, and they're completely unprotected, they burn themselves and they shy away from future innovation, right? It's a bad experience. So they need to enter innovation somewhat protected, right? So too little security has negative externalities on on innovation, but so does too much security. If you put restriction after restriction in front of people trying to innovate, they will give up innovating too. So the main role of a security department in a large company is to give enough comfort to people wanting to innovate that they're not running into any innovation that gives them a negative experience, but at the same time trying to not put any restrictions in their way, right? And that explains why they get hundreds of millions, right? A rather small investment on the future of a company and innovation. And if I had to decide between security and innovation, of course, I'd always pick the latter, right? But fortunately, I don't have to decide. Both are possible at the same time because we can meet the same security goals using different methods. And here's just a couple. The left ones being the ones that put restrictions on people, and the right ones being the ones that let people do whatever they want to do while observing what they do and maybe interfering when it gets dangerous, right? And so instead of having, let's say, a firewall that just blocks things by default, have a monitoring team that observes connections and interferes as soon as those connections become possibly dangerous, right? You can imagine how a security team, a monitoring team, costs a lot more than a static firewall with a few rules. So that is, the right-hand side here is where a lot of that €100 million budget is sunk, right? By just doing a lot more agile security that costs more without protecting you more, right? But still allows innovation. At the core of a lot of this is monitoring. And of course, monitoring isn't trivial to introduce, at least not as trivial as maybe somebody going to RSA conference 3 years ago may have thought, where you would buy a threat intelligence box that suggested all your worries are taken care of by a box. Now we did that in India, obviously. We bought pretty much every box just to play around. But the monitoring stuff was the most interesting because it promised so much and delivered so little value, right? So we plugged this into our banking subsidiary, for instance, and this was a pre-production, so this was just test users. But still, the first day, it was over 24 hours, it produced more than 6 million events, and from that generated 20,000 alerts, right? So you go to RSA, you buy one of these boxes, and the next thing you know is you have 20,000 alerts per day that you have to act on, right? Completely useless, right? Who has time to do 20,000 things per day? And then most people understand this is a sorting through, needle and haystack exercise, and they plan a grand project to get all the data connected to the system, then start sorting through it, then start defining what we call correlation rules that ultimately trigger alerts, and at the very end, act on some security incident. And most people, most companies take way upwards of a year for that, and thanks to project delays, after 2 or 3 years, they just give up, having gotten nowhere with this, right? So right now, it's kind of the hangover phase after everybody buying threat intelligence 2 or 3 years ago. Everybody has given up on threat intelligence. What I'm advocating instead, and what has worked great for us in India, for instance, and in other settings, is start much more modest. Pick a single attack that you understand how it works, collect enough data to detect that attack, build a correlation rule, and have something of value at the end of the first day. A tiny, tiny little bit of monitoring, and add the next tiny little bit the next day, and do it the next day, and do it the next day. It will still take you 2 years to be done with this, but you're delivering value every single day. You have a positive feedback loop where people understand that the intelligence in threat intelligence is actually growing, but not based on the box, but in the mind of the people involved in this operation. And that has helped us enter a lot of markets much more confidently that while we know our technology isn't perfect, at least we have the safety net to fall on, right? And I think this is one example of where security can be innovation friendly, and where we can stop being the department of no which a lot of people call us, right? So I'd like to conclude. I think I've given you insights into how externalities of this community can actually be negative, how we are stifling innovation in companies if we overzealously ask for security, how possibly even our urge to protect everybody from being killed by hackers actually kills people through drunk drivers and otherwise. I hope, though, to have given you some insights that this isn't necessarily so, that balancing the two, for instance, innovation and security is very much possible, and that if we do so, we finally earned the 100 million euro budgets that at least large companies give us to do this every single year, and the responsibility that comes with it. So thank you very much. I should mention that I'm in Tokyo for another week, so if you want to discuss this more intensely, do let me know. I'm here for an entire week. If you do have any short questions, though, let me know now. So let's have a little bit of a discussion now. And with that, thank you very much.
Thanks for your great presentation. I was deeply encouraged by your talk. My question is, security itself does not produce a good amount of money for the running the company. So trying to be the company in the like startup or ventures, they may not want security in the first place. And probably security guys come in late stages. And in that case, the maybe infrastructure are not tightly enough. Maybe it's way too open. So I guess in the early stage of company, you have to be more restrictive, more than monitoring focused approach. What do you think about that?
Yeah, excellent question. So companies definitely do struggle with when to introduce security. And I think as a community, we think that security should be done from day one. And almost every company that has done that doesn't exist anymore today, because somebody else who had the same product idea but didn't bother with security, they were faster, they had a more sexy product, they added security later when they actually had user data to protect, when they actually had business to protect, and those generally are the more successful companies. Now, it's weird to hear myself say that, but I think companies don't do themselves a favor when adding security from day one. I think if you have nothing to protect, no customers, no money, then you don't need to protect it very much, right? So the formula that I often like to use and add in one of the slides is, oops, where did I have it? I like to ask, how interesting is a company to the hacker? Oh gosh, let me just zoom here. Oops, here we go. A risk, a lot of people define risk at likelihood times impact. I have no idea what that is. I've been in this industry for 10 years. I don't know what the likelihood of something is. I don't know what the impact of something is. What I can know is how easy is it to exploit. That's coming out of my technical work, right? That I can answer. I can estimate how much does somebody want to exploit it, right? And a lot of data in your companies is boring. Nobody wants to hack it, right? And finally, I can estimate how much would it hurt the company if it actually were hacked, right? Those three boxes, and that's then risk. The hacker incentive, this middle box, is extremely low for small companies. You can't really steal much from small companies, right? So I'm okay with them going without security, if that, or with little security, if that actually brings innovation to people. And then as soon as the innovation is there, as soon as that drives a more of a process regime, then it's a good time to introduce security. Right? Sorry for a long-winded answer. It was just such a great question. I had to bring this up again.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Yes, this may be a question regarding a similar area, but I'm asking from different standpoint. You, you propose innovation-friendly security, but to implement such an innovation-free security, it requires management should understand the sense of risk management, and also employees should act as a code of ethics. And but unfortunately, from my standpoint, not so many companies and organizations has such kind of the stuff. So how do you think about that? And also how do you think how much percentage of the organization in the world can adopt such an innovation-free security?
Yeah. Oh, can I get my slides back? Yeah, and another great question, and that is a very central one. I'm of course telling you how I did it and how I think it's the right way to do it. What I haven't told you is the transition path of if you're doing it the more restrictive way, how do you get management's approval to spend more money on doing something different, right? Oftentimes, if people argue that their only role is to limit damage, they are budget constrained. If they ignore the blue curve, somebody else implicitly enforces the blue curve on them by not giving them enough money, right? A lot of security departments are money starved because people complain about them, because people say, the security team is in our way. Can you please keep them quiet for us, right? And if the board hears this over and over again, of course there isn't more budget coming. So the one thing, for instance, that I did in India to bridge this gap is to say, I as the security chief, I want no more veto power. I cannot prevent anything from happening in the company. We saw that people violate my rules anyway if they're stupid, right? So please take away my veto power. The only one thing that I demand to have is a discussion with people before they launch new products, new versions, new services, right? I want a one-on-one discussion with them, explain to them what I see as the risk, and if after this you still want to go ahead, do it, right? But then it's not my responsibility, it's your responsibility. You will be appreciative of the knowledge I brought to the table, and you'll appreciate that I don't stand in your way of actually doing products and innovation, right? So get rid of the vetoes, and introduce the CISO as an internal advisor, one who has to be heard, but one who can be ignored.
So you mean the after explaining the risk is their own risk. So allow them to do it their own risk.
Exactly, and to formalize that, we have a form called risk acceptance, where I will write something like, your current application does not have any encryption. Anybody who's on your local Wi-Fi or somewhere on the internet can read whatever you're sending to the server. This will probably lead to bad press because people will reverse engineer this or just look in Wireshark, right? It will also maybe lead to hacking, and then we lose a little bit of money, right? So I suggest to put an encryption. And then in that form, you write, our competitor will launch in 2 weeks with a similar application. We have the one-time opportunity to be the first in the market, and this is worth this much money, and the risk you're saying is worth this much money. I just override the CISO's concern and we'll do it anyway, right? If it does get hacked, we'll pull out this form and we say, we did this for the company. We did this for the future of the company. Please, nobody complain about this hacking. We knew it was going to happen, and we knew it was worthwhile to have the hack happen. Right? Risk acceptance. Right?
So you talked a lot about usable security and why that's important, but it seems like another issue, I guess, is quantifiable security. So a lot of these companies, you know, they come and they buy boxes that report numbers because you can write numbers in reports and graph them. So I guess, what do you think we can do to make security more quantifiable, and kind of where does that fit into all of this?
Yeah, excellent question. And you're just pulling out all the information that I left out from the talk because I didn't have enough time, so I should have just left it in. I enforce 2 KPIs on myself. So I let myself be measured on two ways. One, we just discussed the number of risk acceptances, right? If a risk acceptance is necessary, that means there's some disagreement. I may not have done my job very well, right? So that's negative for me. The other KPI is I call mean time to breach, kind of like the mean time to failure in hardware, mean time to breach. And what I do is I get a team from, I don't know, PwC, Deloitte, KPMG, right? And I tell them, steal this file. Do it whichever way you want. Steal this file or break this application, right? Do it whichever way you want, break it, right? And then I measure how long they take. And sometimes they take an hour because we did something wrong in our Active Directory. Sometimes they take a week, but they never take more than a week. But I track this over time. I get different teams, different red teams, right, to do the exact same exercise over and over and over again, and eventually this curve goes up. But again, it never is more than 1 week. A dedicated hacking team never takes more than 1 week. So if anybody from my team comes with an esoteric attack and says, well, if you could factor these 2 numbers and then do this and this, then you could hack this, and tell them, can you do this in 1 week? No, then this is not our weakest link. It's not going to help us improve the mean time to breach, right? You guys know the Spitfire, the English, I think it was a car engine, but it was put into fighter planes and actually beat Germany thanks to that. Well, good, right? So the Spitfire was designed exactly like that. They built this engine and then they ran it until the engine exploded pretty much. And then they looked, where did it break? They fixed that part. And again, they ran the engine until it broke. And again, they fixed the part. That's how I run my security team. And that's how I have quantifiable security, but at the same time, sobering security. Everything can be hacked in a week.
Thanks.